Have you been told that insulin resistance is just a problem for diabetics? Are you curious if there's more to your chronic pain than you've been told? If so, you're in the right place, because in this video, I'm going to break down insulin resistance and all the ways that it contributes to all chronic pain conditions. By the end, you'll have a better understanding of what it is and how to treat yourself. Insulin resistance doesn't just increase your inflammation, it traps you in it. And now there's a common similarity amongst all chronic pain conditions, and that is dysregulated inflammation. And insulin resistance is one of the main drivers of that dysregulation. And I emphasize dysregulation because inflammation can be good in acute settings, but when it becomes dysregulated and turns chronic, now we only have issues and no benefits. When you consume carbohydrates and sugar, it gets converted into glucose in your bloodstream. But we don't want glucose there. We want it into your cells. Unfortunately, glucose can't get into your cells on its own. That's where insulin comes in. Insulin binds to this receptor, which opens the gate, allowing glucose to travel into the cell. Now, the more glucose, or the more sugar and carbohydrates that you consume, the more glucose that tries to get into your cell. And eventually, the cell gets pretty full. So we have to force even more glucose in there by creating and releasing even more insulin. So now we jam some more glucose in there. And then we get some more insulin and jam even more glucose in there. And eventually we get to the point where the cell just cannot take any more glucose. And if you're not using it, it's reached its limit. This is insulin resistance. The cell no longer thinks that insulin is doing its job. So the next time when the cell is empty and hungry for glucose, the cell's going to remember that insulin didn't do its job before, so why should it trust it now? You could have all the insulin in the world start binding to this receptor, and it's just not going to allow in the same amount of glucose as it did before. If we can't get any more glucose into the cell, it just builds up in the bloodstream where we do not want it. This now activates nuclear factor kappa beta, which is a chronic inflammatory pathway that is very prominent for the chronic pain sufferer. But it doesn't just end here. This now activates tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukins, which are more inflammatory cytokines that then activate your nociceptors, which are the pain-sensing nerves throughout your body. Now that we're increasing pain, we're activating the stress response, which leads to an increase in cortisol, which produces more glucose in your bloodstream, which further amplifies that insulin resistance, which then increases inflammation, which increases nociception stimulation, which creates more pain. And the feedback loop just keeps going around and around until you fix the problem, which is your insulin resistance. But if you're just taking anti-inflammatories, all you're doing is trying to stop the pathway here. But eventually they stop working, and this cycle just keeps continuing despite the fact that you're taking more and different types of anti-inflammatories. Insulin is not just about diabetes. It is directly involved in the structure, function, and repair of your nervous system. If we have our spinal cord here, we've got motor nerve roots. This is information coming out, telling your body what to do, like muscle contractions. And then we have sensory nerve roots. This is information coming in, telling your brain what's going on in and around your body. Now, there's something unique about this sensory nerve root, and that's that little bump called the dorsal root ganglion, because nerves are not just a single thing. It's actually a bundle of individual neurons. And sensory neurons like to all meet in this dorsal root ganglion. They help transfer information from peripheral nerves to your central nervous system. Sensory nerves, especially in the dorsal root ganglion, have insulin receptors. Now, neurons are like electrical wires. They can't transmit information unless they're touching. And they do so by growing axons from their body and dendrites from their tail. When these link up, we create a synapse, and now, just like that electrical wire, information can be transferred from one neuron to the next. When insulin receptors on sensory neurons are activated, they promote the growth of more axons and more dendrites so that these neurons can be in better communication with each other and more appropriately relay information, especially about pain. Insulin also goes one step further and helps maintain mitochondrial function inside of individual neurons. That means more energy, it can do its job better and heal more effectively. But insulin resistance, we lose all of this. Neurons now lose their ability to grow, regenerate, and create their own energy. And at the same time, we're losing insulin's anti-pain effects, especially through the opioid and serotonin pathways. So we're not just losing repair, we're losing our body's built-in pain modulation system. This further pushes our nervous system towards degeneration and hypersensitivity. Insulin resistance literally changes how your spinal cord processes pain, because across all chronic pain conditions, we're not just creating more pain, we're actually handling that information more poorly. All day long, information is constantly going up your spinal cord trying to get to your brain, but your brain can't process it all. So it actually tries to stop most of this information from getting by. This is called descending inhibition. Under normal circumstances, descending inhibition works really well. But with chronic pain, we start to lose this process, and all the information, all the pain signals, things that normally wouldn't cause pain, are now causing a lot of pain. And we call this central sensitization, or the gate control theory of pain. In the spinal cord, insulin receptors help regulate how much pain is able to get through the dorsal horn to your spinal cord and up to your brain. But with insulin resistance, this becomes downregulated, and now more and more pain signals can get through your spinal cord into your brain. And at the same time, all this extra glucose in your blood is now increasing inflammation in your central nervous system. You don't need to know what each of these individual inflammatory pathways and cytokines do. You just need to know that your body can create inflammation in a lot of different ways, and insulin actually modulates 4 of them in your spinal cord alone. All of this inflammation is now creating an even more excitable environment instead of an inhibitory one, creating more pain and allowing more and more to get through to your brain. You are now creating pain in ways you didn't even realize, because you were told that insulin resistance was just for diabetics. It had nothing to do with your chronic pain. You do not need diabetes to have nerve-related pain. Insulin resistance alone, without full-blown diabetes, can create nerve damage, and one of those mechanisms is through the dysregulation of ion channels. So we've got our spinal cord, sensory nerve root. With insulin resistance, what we see is an increase in the expression of these channels that are responsible for detecting acid, mainly from chronic inflammation, and temperature. This dysregulation is going to create more pain signals. But at the same time, your insulin resistance is downregulating the expression of GABA receptors, GABA being your calming neurotransmitter. It promotes descending inhibition, which prevents too much pain signal from getting through your nerves up your spinal cord and to your brain. Likewise, decrease in the expression of potassium pump function. This leads to neuronal instability because now we cannot appropriately balance the amount of potassium inside and outside of your cells, which is going to cause your nerves to fire apparently without reason. And there's also a decreased signaling of nitric oxide, which is going to prevent blood flow from getting to all of these individual neurons. A neuron that is not getting blood is not getting oxygen and it's not getting nutrients. This leads to damage and hyperexcitability. Nerves do not fire for no reason. There is always something causing that nerve to fire. And for you, it might be insulin resistance, even in the absence of diabetes. So there you have it. That is insulin resistance in a nutshell, in all the ways that it contributes to all chronic pain conditions. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of how complex of an issue this really is and how to better treat yourself.